Hello everyone, myself Divakar Sharma. Today, me and my group members Komalpreet Kaur, Harshdeep Singh Pannu, Jagmohan Singh Sandhu, Mohit Pal, Kajal Sharma, we all are going to talk about the case Gilbert Steel Limited versus University Construction Limited, 1976. In this presentation, we will discuss the fact of case, issues, holdings, rationale for the case, reason for judgment, case analysis, and at last, we will end up with the conclusion. This slide introduces the key facts of the case between Gilbert Steel Limited and University Construction Limited. The initial contract was signed on September 4, 1969, establishing a fixed price agreement for steel supply for three buildings. Later, the price were increased due to changes in circumstances. The first increase occurred on October 22, 1969, when a new written contract was signed to raise the price for the first structure. This sets the stage for the dispute over contract modification. Second price increase happened on March 1, 1970, but this time it was based on an oral agreement, and University Construction did not sign a new formal contract. This led to a dispute. Gilbert Steel sued for breach of contract, claiming they should be paid the higher price. Thank you. This all from my side. Rest of the information will be shared by my other team members.
And I am going to present issues in the case. Firstly, enforceability of the oral agreement. A core issue in this case is whether the oral agreement made on March 1, 1970 was legally binding despite the absence of a signed written contract. In business law, oral agreement can sometimes be valid, but they are harder to prove and enforce. The case raises the question of whether verbal modifications can override formally written agreement, especially in the context of large commercial transactions. The second one is a consideration requirements. The case also examines whether the plaintiff Gilbert Steels Ltd provided new consideration for the second price increase. Under contract law, considerations refers to the exchange of some time valuable by both parties to form a binding agreement. The issue here is whether merely continuing the steel supply and existing duty could count as valid consideration for the higher price. This tests the boundaries of the existing duty rule, which holds that fulfilling pre-existing contractual obligation cannot be used as valid consideration for new terms. The third one is oral versus written modifications. A significant legal challenges in this case is whether oral agreement can supersede written contracts. In commercial settings, written agreements are generally favored due to their clarify and enforceability. This case questions like whether parties can alter formal contracts like verbally and whether contracts should recognize such modifications without a written proofs. The case highlights the tension between the rigorous contract enforcement and fairness. On one hand, strictly adhering the original contract preserves legal certainty and prevent opportunistic behavior. On the other hand, allowing oral modifications could accommodate market driven changes such as fluctuating like the material costs, material contracts, making contracts more flexible. The court had to consider whether enforcing the original terms was fair, given the potentials for economic changes. Next one is broader legal implications. The ruling in this case has broader implications for business parties in stresses the importance of written agreement in contract modifications and reinforces the principle that contract changes require clear and mutual consideration. This serves as a cautionary tale for companies that rely on informal or verbal modifications without proper documentations.
Hi, my name is Mohit Pal. In this slide, we will talk about the holding of the case. The Ontario Court of Appeal dismissed the appeal in the favor of University Construction Limited, upholding the trial court decision. Now we talk about the key legal principle. Contract revision necessity new thoughts from both parties. Lack of new consideration. Liberty Steel's continuous steel supply did not represent a new consideration. In this slide, we will discuss about the exiting duty rules. The first one is fulfilling a pre-exiting obligation cannot be used as consideration for contract modification. The next one is legal precedents. Reinforce the principle that contractual change must be supported by the additional value.
My name is Jagmohan Singh. I'm going to talk about rationale for the case. Consideration requirements. The court emphasizes that both parties must contribute new consideration for contract amendments. Existing duty rule, meeting prior obligation does not justify increased payments. Oral versus written modification. Verbal agreement cannot overrule written contract without convincing evidence of mutual revocation. President cited, the court cited still v. Myrick to affirm that modification necessitated new consideration. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kajal Sharma. So today we will talk about the reasons for judgment. So first one is lack of mutual recession. The court found that there was no clear intention to abandon or cancel the original contract. For a modification to be valid, there must be a mutual agreement to rescind the prior contract or create a new one. However, in this case, the court concluded that the parties did not intend to nullify the original written agreement, since University Construction Ltd never signed the updated contract reflecting the price increase. The original agreement remained in effect. This highlights the court's strict adherence to the principle that formal written contracts cannot be easily displaced by informal or oral changes. The next one is insufficient consideration. A major reason for the court's ruling was the lack of new consideration supporting the price increase. Under contract law, consideration is required for any modification to be enforceable. The plaintiff, Gilbert Steel Ltd., argued that the promise of a good deal in future business transactions was part of the consideration. However, the court deemed this promise too vague and speculative to be legally binding. Without concrete and measurable value exchanged, the court rejected the notion that this constituted valid consideration. This reinforces the principle that future or uncertain benefits cannot serve as legal consideration. Application of the existing duty rule. The court applied the existing duty rule, which states that fulfilling pre existing obligations does not count as valid consideration for new contract terms. Since Gilbert Steel was already contractually bound to supply steel at the original price, its continued promise performance did not provide new consideration for the price increase. The court emphasized that simply delivering what was already promised cannot justify a higher payment as it would undermine the contractual requirement for fresh consideration. Next one is rejection of estoppel. Gilbert Steele attempted to invoke estoppel, arguing that university construction's behavior led them to believe the price increase was accepted. However, the court rejected this claim. This estoppel is generally used as a defensive mechanism, not as a tool for enforcing rights. since Gilbert Steele was the party seeking enforcement of the new terms. They could not use estoppel to claim the oral agreement was valid. This demonstrates the court's strict interpretation of estoppel as a shield rather than sword, reinforcing its traditional role in contract law. Now let's talk about the court's emphasis on fairness and precedent. The judgment also reflects the court's commitment to fair and predictable contract enforcement. By refusing to recognize an informal oral modification without clear evidence of mutual consideration, the court prevented businesses from being bound by unsubstantiated verbal agreements. This ruling aligns with legal precedents such as Stilk v. Myrick, which holds that contract modifications require new consideration. The decision underscores the principle that business agreements must be clearly documented to avoid disputes and ensure fairness. The last one is broader legal implications. The judgment serves as a cautionary tale for businesses, highlighting the importance of proper documentation when modifying contracts. It reinforces the legal standard that informal agreements, even if made in good faith, cannot easily override formal written contracts. This provides greater legal certainty and protects parties from unexpected or unfair modifications. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Professor. This side Harshdeep Singh Pannu, and I will be explaining the last slide of the PowerPoint, that is case analysis and conclusion. To start with, the Gilbert Steels Limited versus University Construction Limited. This case highlights critical principle in contract law, particularly the importance of new consideration for modifying contract. The court's decision reinforced the traditional stance that simply fulfilling an existing duty, like continuing to supply steel, cannot be used as a consideration for a price increase. This ruling demonstrates that contract amendments must involve additional value from both parties to be enforceable. Moreover, the case underscores the significance of written agreement in business dealings. While oral modification may be convenient, they are legally precarious without clear and mutual evidence of revocation or new terms. The ruling sent a clear message: verbal promises without formal documentation carry little weight in court. From a business perspective, the case served as a cautionary tale. Companies facing price fluctuation or supply chain issue must ensure that any contract amendment are formalized through paper documentation and legal review. Relying on oral agreement or wage assurance can leave business vulnerable. In a broader context, this case balances the need for contractual certainty with commercial flexibility. While it may seem rigid, the ruling protects businesses from being cowed into unjustified or opportunistic contract changes. It also encourages careful negotiation practices, fostering greater reliability and fairness in commercial relationship. Finally, this case invites reflection. In business, should flexibility ever outweigh strict enforcement of contract? And how can companies safeguard their interest when facing market-driven pricing pressure? Thank you, Professor. That's all from our side.